Not many are willing to accept how brutal nature can be. While horrific acts of violence are fairly common, there's often a narrative that goes out of its way to justify the action. Murder and torture are usually guarded by strong and noble ideas such as justice, revenge, or the greater good. Unfortunately, the world and its inhabitants are cursed with a moral ambiguity. Humans have tried to create laws and stipulations in order to keep the heinous acts to a minimum. But what happens when you are no longer restricted by civilization's code of ethics? How easy can it be for someone to lose their humanity and instead take form of a monstrous being that acts solely on instinct? At the start of this journey, you may want to answer these questions, but the weight of your decision could leave you falling into an inescapable pit of savagery. At the bottom, there is no longer an investigation, so a response becomes unnecessary. This is a cube. The most vile and ruthless creature in existence. It is given the opportunity to experience true freedom in exchange for living in the constant, unforgiving grasp of death. As long as they are victorious in battle, the cube fulfills their primal urges without consequence, in a quest to find the ultimate. While humans are creatures of habit, the cube is a creature of evolution. It craves nothing more than to bask in the euphoric sensation of natural progression. As we go over this lineage of murderous boxes, a story of hardship and triumph will reveal itself. Cubivores are aware of their existence. After the immaculate birth of one specific piggy cube, their first thought is an affirmation of their desire to live, shortly followed by their intentions to become king. And so starts a journey of conquest. The first sustenance they acquire is from snack grass. Even though it is tasty enough and could provide nutrients for survival, this will not be our cube's primary food source. In the quest for total domination, blood must be spilled. The first victim, a small leaf bug, decided to live its life at the wrong place and time. It meets its bitter end at the mouth of our cube. The small insect's demise is a minuscule event in this unforgiving world, but it is the first step on the path of destruction. Because now that our cube has ended a life, it searches for larger prey to feast upon. A color beast known as a tire jack is found peacefully bathing under the warm sunblock, completely unaware of the events that are about to transpire. Most altercations are unwarranted, fueled only by the overwhelming desire for growth. That being said, cubes take part in combat that can only be described as relentless ferocity. The ambush is swift. Once the unsuspecting tire jack has been defeated, the cube uses its advantageous position to assert dominance. What follows is a brutal dismemberment by pure force. While the tire jack's lifeless, fragmented carcass lays still in the pond, our piggy cube undergoes mutation, proudly wearing the color meat they had just tore from its prey. From this point forward, he becomes a killing machine. There is no time for remorse, no room for hesitation, and no species safe from their torment. Some beasts are devoid of color. They will be the Cubivore's main adversary. After eating wildebugs and restoring color to the bleach-white highlands, the piggy cube finds a cub scout playing with his friends. The insatiable desire for the raw meat attached to this child sends our cube into battle. They are outnumbered, but through little more than primal instinct and brute force manages to mutilate every single one of them. The raw paw was delicious, granting them the ability to frolic, but our Cubivore is around 15 minutes old now and decides it's time to start a family. Upon entering the mating grounds, one female is impressed by his 5 mutations. As a reward for his killing spree, she agrees to have intercourse with him until creating offspring and extending the family name to future generations. This child is stronger, faster, and has more limbs, making our previous cube obsolete. Nature was already aware of this harsh reality. This is why Cubivores immediately perish after a successful copulation. The baby pig's first sight is the lifeless corpse reminding him of the world that he lives in. To this he pays little mind because he shares the same goals as his ancestor. It isn't long before he finds the Boy Scout, and this battle goes on into the night. The formidable opponent forces our cube to retreat into the oasis multiple times, but through determination and patience, our pig earns the satisfaction of victory. The now defenseless Boy Scout is reduced to a half-eaten pile of flesh as the Cubivore blissfully consumes its raw bone, raising his defenses and allowing him to continue a reign of terror. In a post-fight monologue, our cube reveals that his options are limited. To circumvent this, he goes in search for the consummate, an alpha female that can give birth to the most powerful stripling. Upon entering the mating grounds, the consummate is nowhere to be found. However, the 7 mutations provides him with the opportunity to engage in group activities. However, out of the 3 females, only one was ovulating. The youngling was born with a large fang, allowing him to bite multiple limbs. Truly a ferocious beast that many fail to compete with. Proud of his heritage, Boomersticks Jr. tries to take his father with him by kicking his head in the general direction of his destination. Unfortunately, the dead weight is too heavy, and the whole process quickly becomes tedious. While this land is harsh and callous, there are training areas to help our Cubivore improve. Here he finds a piece of wood with an abnormal elasticity, allowing him to grow a tongue. Now he can truly experience the sweet taste of his fallen enemies. This inspires him to seek out the Scoutmaster, leader of the Scout clan. As always, he is outnumbered, making this a battle of determination. The pig is overconfident and reckless, resulting in one of the Scouts violently stealing his raw meat. They bit off more than they could chew. Rage consumes the Cubivore and, though bloodied, manages to assassinate all those who oppose him and take his rightful place as the alpha male. Elated from reaching perfection, he is also immediately rewarded with the ultimate's affection. She calls him rugged and manly, then swiftly swallows him whole. It is assumed that at some point he is regurgitated for copulation, but this is where his story on the mortal plane ends. She introduces him to Rainbow Heaven. This is where they reach enlightenment by observing the other deceased cubes. There is no fighting, no conflict, and this is no place for a Cubivore, so he enters the teleporter and undergoes reincarnation. The Cubivore is now a grizzly bear. His first thought is not about existence, only mutation. They are in a familiar land and full of friendly pigs, but like the antagonist of a competitive reality TV show, he isn't there to make friends. After filling his stomach on uncooked pork, Grizzly Boomersticks finds a rampage bowl to roll around in. The resulting scar makes him feel cool and more resilient. The head coach beast is the first threat, albeit only minor. Our bear quickly retrieves the raw paw off of their inferior, colorless body. Unlike the pig, this cube has extensive knowledge of combat. It is a more effective killing machine than its predecessors ever could be, but with physical evolution also came mental progression. Our bear comes close to being empathetic towards the deceased swine. He contemplates remorse, but instead decides to mate with 5 females. This is the first time multiple partners get pregnant, leaving him with a final decision to make. There can only be a single child to continue the family name, so one cub gets to survive, and the other is calmly discarded. Grizzly Boomersticks Jr. is athletic and focused on self-improvement. They quickly find the training grounds and run on the treadmill until a hump starts to form on their back. This gives him the confidence to challenge the CEO beast. It was an absolute slaughter. After tearing off the raw claw from his fallen combatant, night falls upon the world and our cube falls asleep. His dreams of running show a subconscious sense of urgency. The next day brings a new mating session, but also a new opponent. The child is Grizzly Boomersticks III. The adversary is the parental advisory beast. The latter creature is described as hot-headed with a raw bone, but in reality, their strongest trait was cowardice. Despite numerous attempts at retreat, the beast suffered a gruesome and humiliating death, as our bear managed to double gobble all of its limbs and leave with the long-desired raw bone, thus conquering the White Still Highlands. This leaves Grizzly Boomersticks III in a euphoric state of bliss, reveling at his raw energy and sadistic prowess, but then comes an admission of fear when it comes to being the King Cubivore. He knows he's not ready for that fight, but pushes forward regardless, setting his sights on the Herba beasts. A guardsman beast is spotted in the distance. Unfortunately, their thick skin and plentiful limbs can easily deflect the eager bear's attack. Continuing his journey, the bear also finds a neighborhood watch beast, who is yet another cube that he is unable to damage. For the first time in his life, this Cubivore is unable to push forward. Lost and disparaged, he goes for a walk and enters a teleporter. This sends him into the snake in the grasslands. This is, by all accounts, his version of a perfect home. All of the creatures here are worthy opponents that are ready and willing to fight. However, our bear is living on borrowed time. Nature is a cruel mistress that takes pleasure in showing the world's inhabitants when they have lost all purpose. But this Cubivore is granted one final chance to show their worth. He uses every second he has to chomp and gnaw at the wildlife, beating them to death and ripping them apart. This was his 7 minutes in heaven. After being forced to leave his sanctuary, the cube reluctantly mates with 8 females, and then chooses 1 out of the 5 children to be his successor, thus completing his life cycle, and introducing the world to Grizzly Boomersticks IV. This cube completes his father's work without so much as breaking a sweat. First, he easily kills the neighborhood watch beast, then goes on to murder the guardsman beast. His father would be proud. This grants him access to the vigilante beast, who also dies by the predatory mouth of this unrelenting Cubivore. His final opponent is the health inspector beast. This tricky, colorless monster hides among their peers. Even when vastly outnumbered, the Cubivore finds a way to stand victorious. This gives him all the pieces to the raw snaws, allowing entry into the Altamarsh, where he finds the district attorney beast. But every good Cubivore knows when their time has expired. Even though his life was short, the accomplishments were plentiful. He decides to settle down with 8 females, just as his father before him. Boomer V was born with an optimistic personality. Their first act in life is gleefully running in circles. They are happy to be here. The evolutionary process is somehow accelerated for this young cube. In less than 5 minutes, they're already growing an extra fang. A short day of training leads to this cube going to bed happy, knowing that he is the best grizzly cube that their bloodline has to offer. After a quick mutation, the battle with the district attorney beast can finally begin. It was one-sided, to say the least. This victory led to Grizzly Boomersticks V acquiring all 5 pieces of raw meat, allowing him to mature into a big bad bear. But more importantly, this attracts the attention of the ultimate. She shows admiration for his victory over the district attorney beast, calls them a bear in sheep's clothing, and swallows the cube whole, preserving him for later use, stating that with him as the father, the child could be the king of the Cubivores. The world is dark in Paw Pasture. There's an eerie silence that fills the air as the sun rises and the new day arrives. A child falls from the sky, just as the moon did moments ago. Donning a set of misshapen horns and a scar on its forehead, our cube states how going from a pig to a bear to a bird makes absolutely no sense. This is Chicky Boomersticks I, and he is just as confused as you are. Despite his neutral demeanor, there's a heavy weight on his shoulders. He is the first of his kind, a little cock in a big world. Throughout nature's history, this has been proven to be a difficult situation. When trying to enter the mating round, he is rejected. The females insist that he finds new raw meat before entering. Angry after being denied access, the cube immediately heads to the training grounds and thrusts his body into a wooden horse until becoming 54 horny. He then sucks on a tree to work on his tongue game. A full day of training leads to him in a shallow lake where he can drown in his sorrows and get some well-deserved rest. Tomorrow is his big day. It starts by borrowing a limb from a colorful flightless bird. This not only turns our cube into a clash beast, but he is also 12% more fashionable now that the carpet matches the drapes. This gives him the confidence for battle. It was a clumsy attack. The chrome-plated target put up a good fight, but in the end the fiery rage held deep within the little cock led to a series of ramming blows that allowed him to finish on top, and stealing the raw meat from the shoplifter beast in an act of dramatic irony. This time, when entering the mating grounds, the word of his battle attracted 9 females. The night of passion led to the soft, warm embrace of death, and the next morning resulted in Chicky Boomsticks Jr. But this particular cube lacks focus. His first day is spent procrastinating and catching love bugs. There's an empathy to be had for his mentality towards life. Instead of training, he decides to frolic. But as stated earlier, this is an unforgiving world. When entering the oasis, a wild pickpocketer appears out of thin air. The beast has fed off others for survival, but luckily, his friends are weak. Our cube only has one course of action. He quickly takes care of the smaller opponents, then sets his eyes on the criminal ringleader. It is not a fair fight. The pickpocketer is much stronger, much faster, and nearly twice as tall. This becomes nothing more than a battle of attrition. But eventually, they trade blows for the final time. Both combatants fall to the ground from pain and exhaustion, but only one has the willpower to stand up again. His prize is taken from the heavily wounded body, and the family name lives on. Once the battle is over, he contemplates the ancestors that came before him and recollects on a prayer that he made, asking to be big and strong. After a brief introspection, a moment of peace is obtained. This fills the little cock with pride. He feels like a man. So he writes a poem, heads to the mating grounds, and has an orgy with 10 females. This cube got to die knowing that his son will one day feel the same pleasures that his life has to offer. And as you may expect, a new cube is now born. However, instead of venturing out into the world, they instead try to push along the corpse of their deceased ancestor up a small incline. A story from Greek mythology comes to mind, but unlike Sisyphus and his boulder, this is an optional task, and there is something noble about taking on such a challenge, especially at the very beginning of existence. That being said, the cube gives up in about 30 seconds and continues their day as if nothing happened. Eventually, he stumbles upon a treadmill, because much like a Homo sapien, this cube prefers to exert effort while staying in place, instead of actually moving towards a goal. After exploring for quite some time, our cube finds a few small colorful beasts and decides to go on a diet. He will now judge his food, purely based on aesthetics. Unfortunately, this causes a run-in with an extremely tall purse snatcher. Our cube is vastly outnumbered, and getting attacked from all angles. His lackadaisical attitude towards life has caught up with him, and regret starts to sink in. The battle is unwinnable, and he is forced to retreat. This embarrassment shakes him to his core and shatters his frame. Cubivores who show cowardice are devoid of purpose, so he decides to train as hard as he can. First attacking a tree to train his bite, then rolling around to get some new scars, and finally he plans the inevitable conflict that lies ahead. When returning to the battlefield, the purse snatcher stretches its legs, a clear act of intimidation, and a tactic that surely has worked in the past, but what they gain in presence, they lack in strategy. It is not long before the towering beast is pressured into a corner and swiftly dismembered like many before him. There are only a few absolute truths in this world, such universal statements that all living beings should be aware of. One is to be cautious of the unstoppable force of time. Another is to never stand between a cubivore and its mating grounds. Throwing pride to the side and caution to the wind, the mating grounds is exactly where he goes next. It is where he can find praise for his accomplishments. There are 10 females by his side. It's the perfect final resting place, knowing that his bloodline is secured. However, his next of kin starts his life face to face with a con man, and as the con man walks away, one of his underlings viciously attack the newborn cube. There is no time for mourning, no opportunity to explore, just the bitter taste of a harsh reality. But this cube came into the world as a fighter, and a tribute bathed in blood is a time-honored tradition, so he left his opponent's dead body next to his father's as a gift. The newborn is now free to conquer the world that stands before him, and seek vengeance for this deplorable act of injustice. Most of his time is spent walking around in quiet deliberation and occasionally fending off the Purple Beast gang, but the con man never leaves his mind. He knows it's pointless to ask for a motive that led to the attack, because all that matters is that a heinous decision was made. The wretched beast even continues to stand where our cube entered this world, attacking as soon as he comes close. One night, the Cubivore admits to being scared. The Purple Gang and the con man have formed an alliance. Life has been difficult, and doubt clouds his mind. But as soon as the sun rises, so does his confidence. Blinded by rage and determination, the Cubivore runs as fast as he can and lunges at his sworn enemy. The con man is old, and his army is gone. He has spent his entire existence ruining the lives of others, but our cube has spent his entire existence training for revenge. The term an eye for an eye is defined as a principle of retaliation for injuries or damages. It is an ancient Babylonian law and has been echoed as a rule of conduct in civilization for thousands of years. However, this phrase does not apply to what you are witnessing. This is a much more one-sided affair. While the con man attempted to murder a child through a clear display of arrogance and incompetence, he failed. The Cubivore is relentless, passionate, and bloodthirsty. The pain he felt is transferred through his teeth onto his opponent's open wounds, and his attacks break Newton's third law of motion. The con man attacked a newborn child, but he paid in life, and most importantly, limb. Our Cubivore has finally conquered the killing plains. Darkness surrounds him, but it's warm and pleasant. His relief leads to whimsical thoughts of new words and what the future might hold now that his conflict is over, but in reality, all that's left is to pass the torch. He spends the rest of his final day mating with 11 females and feeling at peace, hoping that his son will have a better life than he did. But like most wishes, his go unanswered. The young Cubivore enters this world just like his father before him. A crowd of older children try to gang up on him, but the power of his lineage allows him to overcome this minor adversity. The small group's action carries a great consequence, because the Cubivore spends the next part of his day roaming the beachside, slaughtering all those ignorant enough to stand in his path. Eventually, the denizens of this sand-drenched wasteland chase him out of town, and our Cube finds himself at the wildlife safari. When arriving there, he is greeted by a Muscle Man. The Cube is unfazed by the Muscle Man's stature and decides to strike first. But there is a very distinct difference between showing confidence and being presumptuous. He has to flee from battle so much that at one point he even runs on a treadmill. The Muscle Man hits like a freight train, but this particular fight to the death is measured only by determination, and determination alone. Our Cubivore is the only one left standing. At night, he ends on a high note, calling his last fight a clash of the titans, and in the morning, he happily walks to the mating grounds, resting with the same amount of females that his father had during his last day. There's a sigh of relief to be had when some wishes get granted, because his son is born in safety, alone, and surrounded by oasis. He carries his family's accomplishments close to his chest. Pride carries every step in his stride as he walks to colorful crossings. He was hungry, and no creature was safe. At this point, we have followed this family of cubes for well over 20 generations. Some were poets, others were warriors, but this one is different. He is the embodiment of what the word Cubivore means. He smells fear, eats murder, and is destined to touch greatness. Everyone in his ancestry has fallen to give this cube their opportunity. There's only one thing standing in his way, a hitman hired by nature. The opponent is accompanied by colorless beasts that all attack at the same time, but one by one, they all fall victim to his blows, and then the hitman falls too. As soon as our Cubivore's final victim's limbs are separated from its body, he knows everything has led to this moment. Every struggle his family has endured, every death and dismemberment was made so he could fulfill his purpose. But he questions if he is truly a king. Legend told of the ultimate that would show her face when a cube was ready, and she is found standing in front of him. Her presence is overbearing. She is the perfection that all others strive for. But she says he is not the king, eats him, and then walks away. At the start of this journey, they wanted an answer to this question, but the weight of their curiosity left them falling into an inescapable pit of savagery. At the bottom, there was no longer an investigation, so a response became unnecessary. Closure is not always an option. Thank you.